Here we go. They're ready for us. Okay. Speaking of, let's start there. Let's talk hurricane. Billions in relief, and just recently I read another $40 million in hurricane relief headed to. We all have relatives down south. I've got mom in DeRidder, siblings in Lake Charles. Talk about this new set of relief coming to South Louisiana.
Well, I'm on the Appropriations Committee in the Senate. For the longest time, I was the only member of the Louisiana delegation on an Appropriations Committee. So my job is to not only direct expenditures that I want, but it's to consult with my 7 other colleagues who are members of the congressional delegation to make sure that their needs are satisfied as well. And we work very well together. We don't ask for a penny more than Louisiana deserves, but we don't accept a penny less. I think in the last 5 years, between all the hurricanes, Delta, Ida, the floods, the freezes, we've appropriated, all 8 of us together, about $20 billion. That's for cleanup, that's for small business loans, that's for housing aid, that's to restore Corps of Engineer projects, repair them, that's to repair local infrastructure damaged by the storm. We've had the last 3 or 4 years been really tough for North and South Louisiana.
And how critical now, especially, it seems like yet another insurance company has either faulted or won't be able to provide insurance. This seems to be a continuous thing. We hear one insurance company after another leaving the state of Louisiana.
Well, good question. It started with flood insurance through a program called Risk Rating 2.0. FEMA, under the direction of President Biden, has started raising flood insurance premiums pretty dramatically. I have a bill to try to stop it, but President Biden will veto it if we do pass it. And it's worked a real hardship in Louisiana. We have about 5 million people across America that have flood insurance. About 10% of those are in Louisiana. And our people that are insured for flood are working people. They're not folks with rich people with mansions on the beach. But now we're having a problem not only with flood insurance, but with homeowners and fire and extended coverage. A lot of the insurance companies have chosen to either raise premiums so high that people can't afford them, or to leave Louisiana. And it's becoming a real problem. I'm hoping we can go a year, please, Lord, spare us a year without a natural disaster, and I think that'll help.
I was going to say, is there some stopgap to stop this? Because I got a feeling in the next few weeks I'll be reading a similar story. Another insurance company is bowing out.
Look, we can't make insurance companies do business in Louisiana. You can't do it. If they all leave, we'll have to set up an insurer of last resort. Mm-hmm. We have one already called Citizens Property, but we'll have to expand it because people have to have insurance. Businesses have to have insurance. You just can't engage in commerce without insurance. I don't think it's going to come to that. And we still do have some insurance companies that are willing to write in Louisiana, but they've done it at really increased premiums, and it doesn't do any good to offer insurance if nobody can afford it.
We've talked about this before, the gap in policy beliefs between Republicans and Democrats, perhaps never wider. With that said, how dealing with, hold on one second here, I lost my train of thought.
That's okay.
I can edit that and nobody's going to know the difference where I was headed.
There you
go. That's what the gap in policy belief, obviously, between Democrats and the current and the Republicans right now, never been any wider. Just you've said it before, you feel like the pedal's to the metal with President Biden moving us toward a green future. There's a whole energy sector here in Louisiana you feel is desperate to get back to work and stay at work.
Well, I don't hate anybody. I'm not much into this cancel culture. I don't think you're free if you can't say what you think or can't express yourself. So it doesn't bother me one bit when some of my colleagues in D.C. say things or propose ideas I don't agree with. You have an adult discussion, and then you vote. But just as they're entitled to their opinion, I'm entitled to mine. Really, there are two groups of people now in Washington, D.C. And yes, it's Republican, Democrat, but it's something more fundamental. You have a group of policymakers who believe that only that the federal government made America great, and only the federal government can keep America great. They believe in policy making by experts. I'm not part of that group. The other group believes that what made America great was ordinary people doing extraordinary things, and they have confidence in the private sector, and that's the group that I belong to. President Biden is clearly in the former group. I think it would be fair to say that after 18 months, we know what President Biden believes in. He believes in a bigger government, clearly higher taxes, more spending, more debt, more regulation. He believes in open borders. Some of his people believe that we ought to turn all of our cops into social workers. I think that's an unrealistic view of the world, and I fundamentally disagree with all of that. Now, in terms of energy, about 40% of Louisiana's GDP, our economy, if you will, is directly or indirectly related to oil and gas and petrochemical manufacturing. I support all viable forms of energy. I support wind and solar and nuclear and hydrogen, but I also support oil and gas, and President Biden and his team don't. Their energy policy is wind, solar, and wishful thinking. And this recent bill they just passed, the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which is really an inflation machine, it is designed to destroy the oil and gas industry and to shift capital in America from people's pockets into alternative forms of energy.
Somebody hearing you say that right now, that their favorite national news network may not ever hear that message and say,
Right.
what's this guy talking about? There's no way this is the Inflation Reduction Act.
No,
What is going on in America where you feel like someone that's hearing this on our local signal here, this is probably the first time they've heard someone say that?
Well, most of not all, let me be more balanced. Many of the media organizations in Washington, D.C. Are left-leaning, and many of them are what I call agenda journalists. I've always thought of journalism as a professional who reported who, what, where, why, and when. But there's a new group of journalists in America. I'm not saying it's all of them, but they are agenda journalists. They report who, what, where, why, and when, and then offer their opinion. And the American people don't like it. American people, that's why the American people have started to trust members of the media less and less and less and less and less. And I think it's hurt our media institutions, and I think it's confused Americans.
Well, I would imagine you see a vital importance. You're sitting here talking with us today. The message that local media can get out versus what may necessarily be happening on the national level.
I've seen the polls. I mean, most people in Louisiana. I can't speak for other states, but I saw a poll the other day. People in Louisiana trust their local television news. They trust their local radio news. They get a lot of their news, as do all Americans, off of social media. But I think the poll I looked at saw that 5% or fewer Louisianians actually get their news from newspapers.
And I saw the same.
Now some Americans get their news off cable, but I think the institutions that Americans trust the most, they still trust, in my judgment, as they should, their local TV news, and they trust their favorite website on social media.
So an interview with you today, I'm just going to say I'm sure Dr. Fauci won't be inviting you to his retirement party in December. I've seen you question a number of our health leaders in committee hearings that have gone on that's broadcast, not on all networks, the point we just made there. Do you feel, you've been very critical in some respects of him, do you feel any of his decisions have helped save lives? And why do you want him investigated?
Sure, well, I don't want him investigated. I haven't called for that. Let me say, look, I know Dr. Fauci pretty well. I like Dr. Fauci. I respect him. He's decided to retire. I wish him well. I don't hate anybody.
Sure.
But you know, unless you do your research on Twitter, many Americans, you know that many Americans have questions about how Dr. Fauci, how other public health officials, how the government handled the pandemic. And as I've said before, getting those questions answered has been like trying to slam a revolving door. And I gave an interview recently. I said, Dr. Fauci is going to retire, Godspeed, but he's still going to be subject to a congressional subpoena. And I believe that Dr. Fauci, mostly by both Republicans and Democrats, but more Republicans, is going to be called back to Capitol Hill to answer questions about things like, we know that China lied and the World Health Organization went along with it initially. Why didn't we push back? Why were we caught flat-footed without enough ventilators or protective equipment? Why did we adopt such a strict lockdown model? Was it really necessary? Why did we shut our schools down and risk losing a year's worth of learning for a generation of kids? American people have a lot of questions, and this may not be our last pandemic. I hope it is, but may not be. We need to learn from it. And Dr. Fauci made a lot of these decisions, and I don't want to investigate him, but I want him to answer the questions and tell us what we got right and what we got wrong.
Is it not, though?
My Democratic friends are in control of the Senate, so when they get to decide how the investigations or the hearings are run, and I'm generally only given 5 minutes. It's hard to do it in 5 minutes. But for example, Dr. Fauci has consistently pushed back on the possibility that the coronavirus developed through gain-of-function research in a Chinese lab. Well, we now know, I'm not saying it's a probability, but we now know that it's a real possibility. Dr. Fauci needs to come answer questions about that. You know, why did he condemn people who made that argument? And we now know that it's true. It's not true that it happened, but it's true that it's a real possibility.
And just getting that answer, the why, perhaps better prepares us if we ever find ourselves in another pandemic.
Yeah, and what other gain of research is the American federal government participating in? Gain of research is when you give money to a bunch of scientists to create a virus that can kill you if it ever gets out. And they learn a lot, presumably doing that. But if the virus ever gets out, it can kill everybody, every man, woman, and child if you don't have a vaccine. And if our government is funding that kind of research, who are they funding it with? Where are they funding it? What are they creating? And what other countries are doing this? The American people this is their money that's funding it. They have a right to know.
Last question, because I know you need to get on the road. You talk about empowering our police again. We see videos all the time. There's cameras everywhere, whether it's a bunch of people running into a store, just robbing it blind, to some of the violence we see on the streets. We've had high homicide numbers here in New Orleans. Per capita, it's not looking good in the U.S. as far as the homicide rate. How do you empower police? And is that going to be the difference?
Well, sometimes cops make mistakes. We know that. Cops are human. Sometimes they make mistakes intentionally. And when they do, every cop that does that I'm aware of is punished. And that's as it should be. But that's not most cops. You know, 99% of the cops just want to do their job. And we've got policymakers in Washington, D.C. who believe that cops are more of a problem than criminals. And they believe that if a cop has to shoot a criminal, it's automatically the cop's fault. If a criminal shoots a cop, it's the gun's fault. And I tell my colleagues all the time, police misconduct, intentional misconduct should be punished. But you can't judge all cops by the acts of a few. And, you know, I've been blunt about it. You know, I have colleagues who hate cops, all cops, just because they're cops. And I tell them, if you hate cops just because they're cops, feel free. Next time you get in trouble, pull out your phone, call a crackhead. See how that works out for you. And I believe that.
All right. I think we're good. I know you've got a schedule to keep. Thanks again. Sorry.